Calcium phosphate kidney stones are the third most common type of kidney stone, and they can be incredibly nasty, especially for women who are the primary formers of this stone type. But what do these stones even look like, and what can you do to prevent them? If you'd like answers to these questions and more, stick around for this video. Hi, I'm Joey Weichman, and welcome to Stone Relief. In today's video, we're going to dive into the world of calcium phosphate kidney stones. This stone type is unlike any other because of the several different compositions that are all under this one roof. Even though there is significant variance between these different subtypes, they all share one thing in common, and this one thing is their kryptonite. So to begin better understanding this family of stones, let's lay a foundation of the background of what makes these stones unique. So, as I had mentioned, there are several different compositions that boil into this particular stone type, which is unique to this particular family. So, under the calcium phosphate family, there are going to be hydroxyapatite stones, which we're going to label HA in this video. There's brushite stones, which are calcium monohydrogen phosphate. And then there's also struvite stones. This is the bacterial stone that everybody fears. And these are magnesium ammonium phosphate. Now, the critical thing to know about this particular family of stones is that they will only form in alkaline urine. And this means a pH of typically greater than 7.5 plus or minus, a decimal point here or there on the pH scale. Now, the other thing about these stones is they grow exceptionally fast and exceptionally large. So out of all the different types of stones that are out there, these can be some of the nastiest kidney stones that people can form. And they form, fortunately, at a relatively low rate of occurrence. It's only about 10% of all kidney stones formed. However, they're problematic, and especially for women who tend to form these stones more. Now, the primary reason for why women form these stones more over men, there are several different layers to this. The primary reason is diet. Now, as a whole, the population, not only here in North America, just worldwide, you typically see more women eating a vegan or a vegetarian diet, which tends to track your urine pH towards more alkaline, whereas men typically eat poorer. I guess I'll say, not saying that vegan or vegetarian is a good way to eat, it's not, especially if you have kidney stones, but men tend to eat a lot more processed food, junk food, and just kind of trashy type of diets that lead them more towards the acidic end of the urine spectrum, where they form more uric acid kidney stones. Now, outside of that, the secondary cause is really, it's urinary tract infections and then other type of conditions. And this could be anything from like a, what do I call it, an autoimmune type of condition. There are a whole host of things that could potentially screw with your urine pH. And then lastly, from a tertiary perspective, there's a hormonal element to this as well. So when you're pregnant, things like progesterone and things along those lines can screw around with your urine pH and make you more alkaline. And this is why women typically form calcium phosphate stones, even if they've never formed a kidney stone before in their life, during their pregnancy. So now that we've laid this foundation, we'll dive into the next chapter where we'll look at the first subtype of this kidney stone family and a little bit about what it looks like and what leads this stone type to form. We'll see you there. All right, so let's get acquainted with the first subtype that is part of this calcium oxalate family of stones. I'd like to introduce you to the type 4A-1. Now, this naming scheme is not something you're going to find across the rest of the web. This is just how we've kind of classified this internally based on some research papers that we've used to help us catalog these different types of stones. So this is what the 4A-1 stone type looks like. This is also a potential stone type that you may find mixed in with calcium oxalate monohydrate stones or calcium oxalate dihydrate. They like to intermingle and can create some mixed stone types. So as you saw over here, they're going to be rough and white in their surface composition, which is going to be stark contrast to some of the rest of the stones you're going to see in this family. So when you see something that looks like this, it's pretty definitive that it's this particular stone type. Now, when it comes to the particular causes of this, you're going to see a theme that's going to present itself across all these chapters and all these different stone types. It's alkaline urine of a pH greater than 7.5 roughly. That is the root of all of them, but the source of why the urine is alkaline is going to be that subtle difference as to the contributing factor to that particular stone. So in this case, these are due to UTIs, and it could be a wide range of different types of urinary tract infections, but when you have a urinary tract infection, the way the mechanism works for how the actual bacteria themselves kind of grow and propagate is they alkalize the urine and then they grow in that environment, and they only thrive in alkaline environments, so it's kind of a self-feeding type of cycle and pretty vicious one nevertheless. But if you're getting UTIs, especially recurrent UTIs, and you're forming kidney stones, this might be the stone type that you're forming. Now, some other contributing factors to this particular stone type is something called hypercalciuria. Now, we've talked about this in previous videos, but in essence what this means is there's an elevated level of blood calcium. And on the surface, additional calcium floating around in your body or in your kidneys in particular, it's not a risk factor for kidney stones unless you have other factors that are present, such as oxalate with calcium oxalate kidney stones, and in this case, phosphate in the presence of alkaline urine. So the more calcium that you have floating around free, unbound, not tied to anything else like a phosphate ion or an oxalate ion, they have the potential to bind with things. So the more of it you've got floating around in alkaline urine, the more opportunity you have for it to bind with phosphate to kick out this kind of stone. Stick around the next chapter and we'll talk about the next type of hydroxyapatite calcium phosphate stone. All right, welcome back. Now, the next stone we're going to take a look at is also a hydroxyapatite or HA type of composition for the stone. However, it looks dramatically different, and there's a reason for that, which we'll talk about when we look at the actual causes behind the stone type. But on the surface, it's going to have kind of this brown, almost glazed looking appearance. When I say glazed, think of like a glazed donut. It's kind of got this kind of, it's not really glossy, but it's just kind of a shine or a shimmer to it, just a little bit. It just looks distinctively different than any other type of kidney stone. Now, the causes behind this, again, we're talking about alkaline urine, so 7.5 pH or higher. But what's driving that? There could be several different things that would be linked to this that would drive this particular stone type of formation. And they should, again, when you see this, it should be an automatic trigger that, oh, I am looking at a particular type of calcium phosphate stone. And in all these different things that can contribute to alkaline urine, this stone type is really tightly tied to these particular conditions. Now, distal renal tubular acidosis, or DRTA, we have a video on this. We'll pop a card up here for this as well. But really, this is your body's inability to acidify because there's some sort of a breakdown that's occurring in the renal tubules. And when this occurs, urine goes alkaline and it causes a whole host of other problems as well. And if you want to dive into this more, check out that video. The next thing is Sjogren's syndrome. This is an autoimmune type of condition which, again, produces alkaline urine. And then lastly, medullary sponge kidney, a particularly nasty condition which is like a little porous pockets. You know, your kidney ends up looking like Swiss cheese or a sponge. But this particular condition creates alkaline urine. Now, people who suffer from MSK, they get a whole host of different types of stones. There's calcium oxalate, there's calcium phosphate that go in there. There's sometimes bacterial stones like Struvite, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But nevertheless, if you're seeing this particular stone type, it's likely due to one of these conditions. And at the end of this video, we're going to talk about what you can do to better manage these conditions so that you can positively influence this alkaline urine and neutralize it so you can avoid stones like this. Okay, in this next chapter here, we're going to take a look at the last type of hydroxyapatite composition stone that exists out there. And this is going to be the 4B type of stone. Now, this stone looks markedly different than the previous two. The first one we saw was white. The second one was kind of a dark brown with a glossy surface. And this guy is not only just a little bit of a different color, but the whole shape as a whole is completely different. Now, this stone type is also potentially going to be mixed with struvite, and it's part of a classification of stones called staghorn stones. And struvite and this particular calcium phosphate stone type is in that category. Now, what makes a staghorn, and you can kind of see by the shape of this, but staghorn stones, they grow up into the calyxes of the kidney, which are these little pyramidal shapes, the functional part of the kidney, and they just kind of like cement themselves there. They don't float around in the kidney like some other stone types. These are just kind of like lodged up there, and then they grow out from there, and they are very, very difficult to get rid of. It's not impossible, but it's very, very difficult. Now, in terms of surgical procedures to try to attack a staghorn stone, you're most likely looking at like a percutaneous nephrolithotomy. They're going to puncture a hole in your side, stick in some of what I call those straws or those sheaths, access sheaths, and then they're going to try to work on the stone and break it apart to be able to get it to pass. Now, if there's struvite inside there, that bacterial stone, they'll just remove everything through the access sheath. But if there's not, they may just let everything pass. But you can also attack this stone type with a product that I created called Cleanse, and we've had several people who had success with very large staghorn stones, multiple centimeters, to be able to break them apart over time, to be able to successfully pass them without any kind of surgical or pharmaceutical intervention at all. So keep that in mind if you're seeing this particular stone type. Now, the cause of this, again, is due to alkaline urine. In particular, this is another one of those UTI situations that are presenting themselves. But it also has to do with another factor. There are contributors beyond just the UTI that are going to need to be present in order for this guy to pop up. And those two things are tubular acidification defects, and this could be DRTA like we talked about in the previous chapter, or it could be another mode that is disabling your body's ability to manage the acid and base balance. So ideally your body wants to be in a neutral state, with the exception of some different parts of your body, like your stomach would be more acidic, but in general, neutral is a good thing. So when you have a problem neutralizing, you're going alkaline, in the presence of a UTI, this could potentially pop up. And the other piece of this, again, is hypercalciuria. And we talked about this in the previous chapter, but this is elevated levels of calcium. And the more calcium that you have, if you have alkaline urine in this instance, in the presence of a UTI, it's more chances for those things to get together, crystallize, and then form stones like this, which are particularly nasty because they get up into the calyxes of the kidney. And man, they can cause a lot of problems. In the next chapter, we're going to look at its relative, which is the struvite stone, and talk about that guy a little bit more in detail. All right, so I'd like to introduce you to the struvite version of the calcium phosphate family of stones. They are going to look like this. So, very distinctive appearance versus the rest of the stone family. The first one we looked at was kind of a whitish surface, and this guy is going to be more of a clear type of white. They're very, very distinctive, and I'm certain that the video is not conveying the depth of clarity that you would see if you had a stone right in front of you. Now, fortunately, this stone type is rare because it is super nasty. These are bacterially driven stones, and they are very, very difficult to get rid of. So this is not something that you would typically treat with just like a pharmaceutical intervention, like a tamsulosin or a Flomax, or a product like ours, like Cleanse, because you're dealing with bacteria. And whenever you're dealing with bacteria, there's a risk for sepsis. And not only is there potential kidney death involved with this, people can die, like you could die from sepsis. Now again, this is super rare, and I don't mean to be pushing fear on anybody, but it is something that you should be aware of, because bacteria, when it comes to kidney stones, it's nothing to screw around with. And this is, again, why typically the previous stone type we looked at and this guy are treated with PCNL, because it allows surgeons to get access to where the stone is directly and then remove it to prevent spread of the bacteria throughout the rest of your urinary tract, because once this bacteria is in there, it is exceptionally hard to get rid of. I've worked with several people over the course of the last decade, and it is a monumental battle to try to kill the different bacteria strains that are responsible for this stone type. They are antibiotic resistant, and they're also resistant to a whole host of natural different alternatives like colostrum that could be used to potentially kill off viruses and bacteria. Very, very nasty stuff. So when you do get one of these, really it's medical attention time. Now, the cause of this specifically relates to urea splitting bacteria that is tied to a urinary tract infection. Now, there are a whole host of different bacteria types that could lead to this, but the big two are really Proteus mirabilis, and then there's also something called Klebsiella. These two species are almost always associated with this particular stone type, and again, they're antibiotic resistant in most cases, and they are exceptionally difficult to get rid of. there's possibilities for you to be able to treat it, and there are definitely things that you can do to try to slow down the formation of this particular stone type, but they're very, very difficult to get rid of. But we'll talk about that more in the last chapter. But before we get there, we got one more stone type to go, and we're going to talk about the brushite stones, which are a whole different type of animal from the rest of the calcium phosphate family.
Just a reminder, this information is available in written form on our website. Find the link below in the description.
All right, in this last chapter, I want to introduce you to the brushite stone type of the calcium phosphate family. And there are two different versions of this that you may see depending upon where the stone is in its formation. And we'll talk about it here shortly, but this is in general what you're looking for. Now, these are calcium monohydrogen phosphate stones, which are different from the hydroxyapatite and also the struvite stones that we saw previously. And they have the greatest potential for kidney damage, even beyond those of like the staghorn and the struvite stones, because these guys, they actually grow up into the tubules themselves that are the functional unit of the kidney. So the functional unit of the kidney is what are all, just like, this is an oversimplification, but this is where all of the filtering of, our waste products from our blood that eventually turn into urine. And these guys, they just get jammed right up in there and they gum up the entire works. And this is a major problem. Not only is it incredibly painful, but it also impacts kidney functioning, and it could potentially lead to permanent kidney damage. So if you're forming brushite stones, you're really going to want to pay attention to this next chapter when we talk about prevention, because these are controllable. They are a byproduct of our diet. So you have the ability to control them, but if you're seeing this look something like this, got to take action, because the end result, if you don't address it, is not good. A couple other things. Very, very high rate of recurrence, and that again boils down to itself of, you should take action to try to fix these things and do everything you can to get that done. And they are also resistant to shockwave lithotripsy. They are exceptionally dense. I believe that they are probably one of the most dense kidney stones that are capable of being formed by a human. And on the HU, or Hounsfield unit scale, and again, we have a video on this if you want to check out about kidney stone density that we'll tag up in the card, but this is a roughly 1100 plus HU density. Super, super dense. Now, calcium oxalate monohydrate stones are generally regarded as pretty dense, but those are generally around like 850, maybe up to 1,000. So these guys are in their own league. So shockwave lithotripsy, very, very difficult. And then ureteroscopy and percutaneous nephrolithotomy are really your only options if the stone is larger than 10 millimeters. These guys can still pass. I've worked with several people who have passed these. It ain't fun, but it is possible if it's below 10 millimeters. But it may be slow depending upon the size. But it is passable, but they are not going to break apart. You're just going to have to grit and bear it and push it through. Now, when I mentioned the differences in terms of how these things are going to look and where they are in the process. So at the beginning stages of formations, you're going to see these long rod-like crystals that are going to really define this as a brushite stone. And again, this is indicative of these things kind of like poking themselves up into the tubules of your kidney. But eventually, as the stone matures, depending on how long it's hanging out in that position, it eventually turns up looking a little bit like a cabbage. That's like the best thing that I could used to describe this. Is it's kind of like a cabbagey type of state. So as the stone continues to crystallize and precipitate more of itself on top of itself, this is the general look that it might get. So I've seen people pass it when it looks like this, and I've also seen people pass it when it looks like this. So depending upon where everything is at when that stone finally releases for the kidney, you might have a couple different looks to that particular stone, but they are the exact same stone. Now, causes of this stone type. Again, I had mentioned this just a little bit ago, but it's alkaline urine, again, pH of 7.5 or greater, and it's primarily due to diet. So the things that you are eating are pushing your urine towards alkaline. Now, predominantly if you're eating an vegetarian or a vegan diet, you're gonna be in this classification. And this is where we see most people getting this particular stone type. And in particular, it's women, because they tend to eat in that fashion more often than men do. So it's diet. And there's also another contributing factor to this as well, which is hypercalciuria again. So again, more free, unbound calcium in your urine. There's more opportunity when urine is alkaline to bind together to form this kidney stone type. But again, I want to reiterate, and I've talked about this again in several videos, calcium's not the problem. It's just an innocent bystander that gets hijacked when other things are wrong in your body. In particular, with this case, it's your urine pH that is the issue. So now that we've covered all these different wacky stone types that fall under the calcium phosphate family, what the heck can you do about it? Stick around for this last chapter and we'll talk about what you can do. All right, so if you haven't picked up on what I've been laying down so far, these particular stones can be prevented. It's all about managing urine pH. So stones cannot form from the calcium phosphate family if your urine pH is neutral. And neutral, what I mean by that is anywhere between 6.5 to 7.5 on the pH scale. Now, some people will think, well, I've got alkaline urine. Well, let's just acidify it. It's fine. No. If you go that direction towards more acidic urine, less than 6.5 on the pH scale, you could potentially open yourself up to uric acid stones. You could open yourself up to calcium oxalate stones, both monohydrate and dihydrate. It's just not good. So as you can see on the extremes, kidney stones form. Really, truly, a lot of what we're dealing with is to do with urine pH. This dictates so much because most stone types, with the exception of cystine stones, are pH dependent. So if you can manage the urine pH, you can manage these stones. You can prevent them. You don't need any fancy supplement. You don't need drugs. You don't need surgery. You can do it yourself with the things that you put in your mouth. So that being said, this next piece is diet is the best way to manage this. So when we take a look at things on the spectrum, we talked about how a vegan or a vegetarian diet is going to push your urine towards alkaline. And then on the other side of the scale, we also mentioned a little bit earlier in this video about how men typically tend to eat more junky food, ultra-processed foods, lots of starchy potatoes and things fried in seed oils. This is really the root of metabolic dysfunction. And metabolic dysfunction lends itself towards calcium oxalate stones and also uric acid stones. Right there in the middle, you don't see any stone types being formed. And in the middle is where we need to be when it comes to our urine pH. There's this thing that's been kind of like building over the course of the last decade, I think, about like go alkaline, drink alkaline water, alkalize this, alkalize that. That's just a bunch of bullshit. It's marketing to sell you some stuff that you don't need. Your body, especially your urine, is meant to be in a neutral state. So if you can eat the way that we are meant to eat, which is a carnivore or an animal-based diet, you're neutralizing your urine. And when you neutralize your urine, you prevent things like calcium phosphate kidney stones. It really is that simple, guys. I know that making dietary changes can be cumbersome, but you can do it. Take the steps to put it in place, and you can completely control the outcome when it comes to your kidney stones. Are you spending thousands of hours of surgery just to end up with another kidney stone a year later? Learn everything you need to know to say a big you to your kidney stones inside our free community at kidneystones.com.